Hello friends, so continuing the video of USA, EU, NATO, central banks, Federal Reserve, whoever it is, uh, helping Pustalenin reformulating their situation. Uh, what happened is unexpected, of course, and they're all scrambling to fix the situation and get Pustalenin up on his feet or his hoofs for that matter. You know, donkey's hoofs. So they're getting him up back on his hoofs, or their hoofs, and then they want him to rush again into Europe, Western Europe. So right now, they are the the establishment under the umbrella of Israel is churning propaganda and deception and psychological spin zones. Each spin zone is spin zone disk is as wide as a galaxy in heavens, right? In space. That's how bad things are, and the deception and the cover up and lies and deceit and so on to convince people that they're with Ukraine when they're really against Ukraine. That's what's going on, folks. Nothing else really. So now back to our point. The cash plane. So early in the pandemic, that basically was detrimental to people's life and finances and savings and so on. Many people actually started spending their own savings, as this pandemic, caused them to lose their work, their livelihood, their jobs, and so on, and their savings began to they started using their savings and depleting whatever reserve they had saved for their future, their retirement, their children, and so on and so forth. It's that simple, folks. That's how detrimental that was. I do remember an assistant. Do you know this guy? What's his name? Hathaway something. He's an investor, supposedly billionaire investor. Not that he gets money from anywhere, but by way of Obama and Trump and Bush and whoever it is, they get it from on account of Americans by way of government. Buffett, his name is Buffett. Now he had an assistant, Montenegro or something of the sort. I forgot his name. Warren Buffett and his assistant is one of his main henchmen, right? Said upon the pandemic, and I quote, that he complained in one of the interviews, and that's on one of the well-known worldwide financial outlets, news outlets or media outlets, that he complained that companies who were hit with this pandemic now and their doors are closed and so on and so forth, the pandemic took its toll, because right now, whether it's a restaurant or a manufacturing company or whoever it is, they closed their doors because of the pandemic. That's how detrimental that pandemic was. And he said, and I quote, he complained that people and companies are not asking for rescue investment. I'm going to put this in quotes for you guys. Rescue investment. And then early on, during that pandemic, a cargo plane, one of those giant cargo planes, Russian Antonov, I think 128 or something of the sort, not the Almira of Ukraine, which was destroyed by Russians now, but it's something similar. It's got like 6 jet engines and like very large body, and it's a military cargo plane. Landed supposedly in Washington, D.C. on the watch of Trump, of course, Shrimp Trump. And unloaded masks, masks so that they can protect against virus transmission. That Pustalenin is helping United States with masks, as if the United States is so helpless that they cannot manufacture masks, right? Or so desperate for it that they need it directly and so on. Or as if Russia has ready-made, millions of masks manufactured for the United States. If you look at the masks themselves, you'll see that they're probably manufactured in China. What were in the boxes? I don't know. Nobody knows, of course. Ask Trump, he knows. But here's what the airplane was here for. Days before Trump passed, and of course his henchmen like McConnell and Pelosi and whatnot, passed the appropriation bill and debt raise limit and those tricks that they used to siphon off trillions. And that airplane basically went back to Russia, filled with cash, hundreds of $100 bills, and guess what? Trump was basically pumping all kind of cash and technology and intelligence and into Russia. Trump was far more detrimental to the United States security and top secrets and so on than Snowden was. He was basically like about 1,000 Edward Snowden. He basically gave Russia and China and Iran, you name it, folks. So that money went to Russia, and from there it gets distributed. Iran gets some, ISIS gets some, Hezbollah gets some, Qaeda gets some. All those organizations, like the Syrian regime gets supported, and so on and so forth, right? So that's what's going on. You may think that's far-fetched, and this is like a wild imaginations. Oh no, folks, that's what it is. That is where support is. This octopus of finances and so on, headed from Tel Aviv, right? Finances all these terrorist organizations and rogue government or regimes like that of Russia and Iran and China, for that matter. And even some companies, like the G7 donated like billions to this Amazon, because of course the investors would lose their money. So not aside from the U.S. Government shelling out billions and giving it to that company and other companies, of course, and stock markets and here and there. Folks, the financial octopus is so moving. Like now, the water is so murky, we humans can't see through it anymore. And not printing, digitizing money, and it's like there's like in the financial business, those investors, the gangs of New York, now have caused apocalypse. There's financial apocalypse in the making, right? Theft of trillions, money transfer, cryptocurrencies, Obamacare siphoning off like what, 1 trillion a year, who knows? And nobody uses it, right? Even some companies I know of, like big companies, they dropped support for it. Health companies, right? Because nobody uses it really. They don't accept it anymore. But guess what? The subsidies, which are really nobody knows who is subsidized and who's not, right? The U.S. government is paying for. All that is illegitimate, folks, whether it's cryptocurrency, whether it's Obamacare, whether it's paying for stock markets, whether it's giving regimes like that of Syria and Iran and China and Russia and here and there. But then all that wealth, stolen wealth, of course, illegitimate, illegal wealth, is concentrated in few hands, folks. I'll give you an example. In Russia, you hear about oligarchs now losing their yachts. It's mind-boggling, folks. That family in that tribe in Moscow, the Lizard Eye Cabal of Moscow, which is a tentacle, which is a leg of the tripod of Israel, is one and the same, folks. All that is to deceive you and tell you that there is like wow, it was arrested for whatever it is. Oligarchs so and oligarchs so. No, folks, they're the same family, and all that is to deceive the public about them and then to try to save their money. They're no different than Jeffrey Epstein. They tell you he died in prison. That's a lie, folks. Not just that, when he died, they whisked him out. His brother, Bob Barr, or whatever his name is, Barr, B-A-R-R, relative of Roseanne Barr, of course, right? Even secured him a will, right, 3 days earlier, and then that saved his stolen 500 million or whatever it is. because that's it. All his victims now can't say shit. Uh, that's no different, folks. That's no different. The oligarchs of Russia, and Epstein and the Trumps and the Tudors and the Schwarzman, and they're all the same, folks. They're grabbing the entire planet under the happy, grinning face of Netanyahu. That's it, folks. Nothing more, nothing less. I mentioned earlier about suddenly the war in Yemen suddenly comes to a halt. Why? Because they need soldiers, both Houthis. Now you're going to see Houthis, you're going to see Hezbollah, you're going to see Iranians, Shiites, and even some of those ISIS and Qaeda. You're going to see them fighting among the ranks of the Russians against Ukraine. Why? Because they have to bring it back up. This plan of apocalypse for Europe has just come to a halt suddenly. It just fell down, right? So that's what it is. I'll give you an example of ISIS, folks. They're symbolic, and they're an Israeli entity. In the west of Syria, I remember early on when the Intifada happened, or demonstrations, and eventually the army defected because the army don't want to shoot their own people, right? They started Russian airplanes and Syrian regime airplanes and so on. They started bombing villages and cities, like in the west, like where I come from in Homs, right? And there was an interview with one of the rebel leaders, and these are not ISIS or Qaeda or anything else. They're just local. They don't want to go to Germany or become refugees or anything like that. They just want to be free and build their country, and rid themselves of this yoke of Lenin and Stalin thing that is sitting on top of them. You know what? The Syrian regime makes Stalin and Lenin pale by comparison of their horror and atrocities and torture and you name it, folks. We heard stories, and these are authenticated, of something sickly taking place in those gulags of Syria and so on and so forth. But nonetheless, and they told them that the airplanes are, dropping ordnance on ISIS. He said there's no ISIS here, because whenever those Syrian democratic rebels found an ISIS cell or pocket here and there, they came and basically whacked them into death right there and then, because they knew they were nothing but something sinister, come from nowhere and so on. But the purpose of it is now, and they committed terrorism in its name, and horror in its name, like severing heads and so on and so forth. Sunnis don't do that, folks, unless you're judged by court. If you kill someone by, say, way of robbery or something like that, then you get executed. It's fair justice. And they now became the motive for Western military people who, in fact, started going there and then destroying cities like Mosul and other Syrian cities and so on and so forth, and villages, based on them understanding that they're destroying something sinister called ISIS and Qaeda, when there are no ISIS or Qaeda there. They were made, actually, this is like someone, some criminal going into a house, killing someone, and then bringing artifacts from some neighbor and putting them there, and then eventually the two families or the two houses start killing each other because they wholeheartedly believe that one of them committed an atrocity or committed a criminal act against the other, when not one of them really hurt the other. The third party was just basically watching for both of them to die, and then he or she, those creatures, take over the houses, right? That's what happened. That's what ISIS is, folks. And going back into the wealth that has been taken by way of governments, and White House, and Senate, and Congress, and here and there, Germany, you name it. It's all getting concentrated in those few hands, folks, who are now professing to be antagonists toward each other. That's not the case, folks. That's not the case at all. Talk about Russia. Let's talk about Russia for a minute. Russia, with the oil and natural deposit, all their wealth is concentrated in few hands, right? Now, in the gangs of New York, they gloat about billions. They don't, what is a millionaire? Millions are frowned upon now. They steal in billions now. Super billionaire. Where do you get that? You get entire companies, like fleet of airlines or transportation or defense manufacturing or and they hardly make money, you know, like, and how did these guys without any foundation for producing wealth get super billionaires or investment? You telling me the world, the majority of the world has no money now? They're selling they're selling trillions and giving it to you. It just doesn't make sense, folks. But no worries, all these are numbers, and they will eventually be demolished. And that scheme, whether it's pyramid scheme or inverted pyramid scheme, right, where governments are stealing the majority of the wealth of people and transferring those to, you know, investors and whatnot, those gangs of New York and oligarchs and whatnot, you know, the Abramowitz, right, Abramovitz, they will eventually lose all that money, you know, and they don't care. It seems like even if this process destroyed the wealth of the world and destroyed humanity and so on, they don't care, you know. And if 100 years later, if things change, they will do it again. But I assure you, 100 years later, they won't be around as they are now to do it again. So that's what it is. Now in Russia, the oligarchs own all the money, right? Then there are quite few, not many, right? And then the vast majority of Russians live in poverty and so on and so forth. And that's why they're looting in Ukraine, you know. Not just that, there's a certain rank among them who really cares, who is not just willing to steal money and whatnot, or destroy civilization or economies and whatnot, or they're willing to rape and kill and maim without any hesitation. Some of them did that in Syria, and some of them belong to the Syrian regime and oligarchs and Pustalenins and lizard eye cabal of Moscow and Ayatollahs, mullahs of Iran and Hezbollah and the Northern Alliance of Afghanistan, right? You know, even before the existence of ISIS and Qaeda and even Taliban, that Northern Alliance, along with their newly found or old alliance, right, with Pustalenins under Netanyahu, of course, they came into the country and murdered no less than 2 million people, innocent bystanders, civilians. They would just go into a village and basically whack it, and so on and so forth. And you would wonder, why would they want to do that, you know? But guess what? Here's that deep religious hatred that is unfounded, that's weird, man. I mean, that's like comes from nowhere. Its origins is mysterious and misunderstood, and nobody knows really, but it's got some real ugly sides to it. And they did that elsewhere. They did that in Russia. They did that as the Soviet Union, as communism. They did that in Europe. They did that everywhere else. But then again, like I said, back to the original point, all the wealth is concentrated in few hands, while everybody in Russia languishes and so on. That's what it is, folks. What is coming to Europe is nothing short of that, even more, because they want to purge it, purge it, just like the Stalin and Lenin did when they moved into, when they established or manifested their revolution based on that, those books of communism, these dark dogmas. Now some people defend them and say, oh, they're good on paper. Oh, folks, you don't know how to read them. Anyways, Nazism, now we know, it springs not from the same root. It springs from the same root of communism, of the Iran's revolution in 1979, of Castro, of Hezbollah, of even old Mongols like Genghis Khan and Hulagus, right? And so on and so forth, right? And no, this is not an allegory, folks. This is reality. That's the founders of it are those who founded it, basic and simple. Same one, Netanyahu, right? Now it has become a burden. Now it did manifest itself in Germany and was able to acquire and go with the flow and ride the events in Germany and make the events in Germany more than ISIS did. ISIS really never manifested into anything. really, because Sunnis knew what it was, and they started whacking it right and left, right, and all that you hear in news and in reports about what's going on in Syria and who is falsehood, basic and simple. UN is supporting the Syrian regime tooth and nail, financially. They even behaved on its behalf in trying to empty cities and towns and so on, in order to make it possible for them and Qaeda and ISIS and Russian forces and Russian orcs, right, to go in and slaughter the population after the defenders left, right. That was the work of United Nations on behalf of them, by order of Israel, of course. So don't believe all these reports you hear about the Middle East, folks. I mean, just drop it right there and then. All you need to know about the Middle East is that there are a bunch of orcs and dictators and butchers and sickos and so on running the Middle East, and Israel is supporting them and spreading its hegemony over the people on their backs, basic and simple. Terrorism was committed by Shiites, and ISIS and Qaeda and so on are nothing but those people. Sunnis have nothing to do with terrorism or anything else. They're not even, I don't think they're even in the West. All right, so that's point. So now the Nazism, although people were hurt in World War I and what happened between the 20 years between World War I and World War II, were in preparation to motivate and hurt German people in accepting Nazism, and they did, right? They didn't know, not all of them. I must say, not all of them. Eventually, it became like a force in recruitment and so on. And now Germans have to suffer that as long as they exist, whether it is by reparations or whatever it is, or indoctrination of Russian orcs to come and like denazify Germany. And you think that that has happened in World War II? No, 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 no. My expectation is, and I don't expect that to happen, of course, this is a gigantic if Russia, those Pustalenins and lizard eyeing Germany, they will come and do a mother of all blood purges on you. In fact, if they arrive at your country will no longer be there. Basic and simple, much of your population will perish, and some of it will be relocated to Siberia and here and there. It's that simple. Based on what? Nazism, which really the Pustalenins made. And that's that, folks. Scandinavians and Germans and whoever you are. This EU and NATO and so on, this is detrimental for you, folks. Right now, these are the two entities that are making sure to hold Europe down. If this was monarchies, right, in Europe, believe me, folks, they would have already intervened in Ukraine. If these European countries were still under monarchies, they will have intervened in Ukraine already. They will not wait until that dark, looming cloud on the horizon comes and engulfs their country and blankets their country. So that's Nazism. You Germans are going to be, it happened to me. I started learning German a few years back. And then I met with this young man here in the US. And, we were talking business. He was young and so on. And, I started bragging. After we left the meeting, we met in a certain hotel. And then it was business. He worked for a certain agency. And then after we left, we were walking in front of the hotel. And I said, that's here in the US. I said, hey, you know what? I'm learning German. And that was, 6-7 years ago. And his retort or his answer shocked me. I was basically speechless to him. Why would someone say something like that? He says, aren't these people like Nazis or something like that? I was like, whoa. And I was flabbergasted. I mean, whenever the word German came up with those people, the only thing they have to say is like, oh, Nazis. Poor Germans. I really feel bad for them. Like I said, there are elements among them, and there are elements among the Russians back then who really hurt the other side, right? And these were like brethren, right? If they met on the battlefield, they would come and eat together and drink together, and then they immediately and whatever it is. But that's how bad things are, folks. Germans' future and existence is tied to Nazism. Unfair, folks. Unfair. I mean, how about there are many Germans, the vast majority of Germans, when they embraced Nazism, they didn't know what it was. They thought it was going to relieve them from a deadly 20 years and of reparations, of losing their monarchy, of poverty, and so on. I saw people, their footage, black and white videos or films that showed even military officers sitting on the sidewalk begging for money, and their situation was pretty bad. Not just that, I mean, their pride as a nation. Every nation has a pride, and you can't blame the German for having pride as a nation, right? Was hurt and was so on and so on. So when Nazism appeared on the horizon in the country, they embraced it. But I believe they knew not too long afterwards, after the start of the war, they realized that there's a problem there, right? And many of them didn't like it anymore. But they had no choice, because the Nazism was something similar to Lenin and Stalin, and the regime in Syria and the regime in Iran, and Castro, and so on and so forth. Basically, you speak against Nazism and you're gone. The SS, which replaced the stormtroopers, they just basically would arrest you, and that's it. And even the stormtroopers who really brought Hitler into power were murdered by the SS, and some of them, it was reported that some of them were saluting Hitler when they were being shot by the SS, as a matter of fact, not knowing that it was Hitler, who sent them. And his cohorts, he's just not one person. Nazis and not one person. He was only the leader, similar to Saddam Hussein or Ayatollah Khomeini or Hafiz Assad or Lenin and Stalin and Castro and so on. There is a whole movement behind them. John Kennedy talked about that. So that's what it is, folks. Germany, if Pustalenin makes it to your country, he's going to use that Nazism again, and he's going to blood purge you, and he's going to probably get reparations, and so on. I remember there was, after 2011 or, a few years back, when Greece, it got greasy in Greece. And their basically economy was collapsing, and Germany came to the rescue, right? And then they started that this guy Tsipras, or who's his foreign minister, threatened Germany if they don't pay them in like billions and billions and billions, threatened Germany. And I recall that they have evidence to atrocities of Nazis in Greece and so on and so forth. It's not like the robber holding up a country, right? Because they want hundreds of billions or billions or whatever it is, so that they can build their economy, which was so corrupt and stolen by those very same politicians that they hate and threaten their victims of being Nazis, right? That here comes the Tsipras of Greece pointing a gun at Germany. You either pay billions, or you Nazis, I have evidence against you. Now, guess what? You're going to find in the future that Chinese regime may need few $1 billion, and then they're going to produce evidence by help from Robert Mugabe or or MVS. They're going to produce evidence that Nazism had murdered millions in Shanghai, right? And then guess what? Germany can't say shit, right? Why can't they say that? Well, guess what? If you're in duress, and if you're tied down, guess what? All the dogs are going to come and bite you. So there you have it. Germans, you're going to live under the shadow of Nazism the rest of your life, so long you exist as a country. But my guesstimate is that if Pustalenin and his orcs makes it to your country, that's it. Say goodbye to Germany as you knew it for thousands of years. Not the work of your own hands or your own deeds. Oh, no. It was imposed on you, whatever it was. All right. This is my teleprompter, right? Arabs supporting Russia. Those Gulf countries, UAE, Saudi, Qatar, Kuwait, What else? UAE, Oman. So that's 5 of them, right? I don't know about Yemen. Yemen doesn't have oil. Uh, they have been supporting Pustalenin from the get-go. Whether in Syria they 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 footed the bill for Russia's operation in Syria, and they supported its economy along with the USA, of course, and the United Nations, and most likely America, and whoever it is. Not just that, they support Hezbollah in Lebanon. They support the Syrian regime in Syria. They support Iran's regime. They support that regime in Iraq as well, and so on and so forth. In 2017, I was in Syria, right? In my home, I have a home there, and guess what? My farm, I had a farm, and it was destroyed by the Syrian regime. And I was watching TV, and there comes the back then foreign minister of Saudi, Adel Al-Jubeir, the one who visited Germany at one time and talked about Berlin, Zier, Schoenstatt, and so on. And he said, and I quote, he was talking in English, and I was watching him on that little TV I had in my house and so on. He said, and I quote, that the Saudi government, and that was in 2017, that they are supporting the government of Syria and Iraq. I quote him, I'm not making this up. In fact, I don't call them governments. They're not governments there. They're some highway robbers, morbid creatures who took over the country and began the systematic slaughter. This is similar to saying communism is a legitimate movement in Russia and elsewhere. It's not, folks. It'll never become, never was, never is, never will become. I heard him myself. And that man, back then, that whatever he is, right, Rabbi Adel Al-Jubeir, was representing the Saudi government. Why would he want to make such a statement, right? If it was not true, or if it was like divulging big secret, they should have punished him, but no. Later on, we could see MBS, hugging with his buddy Putin and so on and so forth, and they're happy about murdering millions of Syrians and then making the rest refugees and so on. Not just that, he just supposedly gave Jared Kushner $2 billion for what? And before that, in 2017, I heard reports when I was back in Syria that, and the one who reported to me has pretty good information, can count on that, right? Said that MBS decided to pay $500 billion. That's probably how much the Saudis saved. I don't think there's that money anyway back then, but perhaps that's what the country has saved for so many decades, right? To the United States to buy new weapons. And he said, this guy who was reporting to me, he was happy that now this is going to create jobs and so on and so forth. But first of all, where are the weapons, man? I don't see them, right? To where did the $500 billion go? I think it went to the stock market, similar to Hamad bin Jassim, the Prince of Qatar, not this guy, his father, donating $5 billion to the victims of Hurricane Sandy in New Jersey. Not that these investors need any money, they're already stealing billions by way of Obama and whatnot, right? But hey, sucking up, or possibly they're his relatives, and that's the most likely reason. $5 billion, right? Now in Saudi, there is so much poverty. Sunnis like myself, in Saudis, they are very poor, right? I know them. I lived there for a couple of years in Saudi. They hardly make ends meet, and that's the vast majority of the people in Saudi. They are Sunnis like myself, and they're poor, Sure, they can buy a car, unlike Syria. You can't buy a car in Syria unless you're an Alawite or Shiites or Jewish or Masonic or whatever. Even the Masonics, I think, they don't have it good, right? And then he goes and gives $2 billion to Kushner. What are you fucking talking about? I mean, this is mind-boggling. What did he do to you? Oh, it's that mother's blood, folks. I assure you. So that's the Arabs, man. The local Arabs are good people. Those Sunnis are just like, you walk here in the US or Germany or in India or in Africa. They're hard-working people. They just want to make a living. They don't think of politics or conspiracy or manipulation or stock markets or whatnot, or gloat about being super billionaires because millions are no longer enough, you know. Anyways, there are more about that, folks. You know, the Tesla thing. Oh man, I can tell you stories, horror stories about that. It cost the taxpayer, that fake company. Well, I'm sorry, not fake. It's a company, right? Uh, I'm saying that because I don't want this video to be deleted because I said fake, right? I don't mean fake like it doesn't exist. It does exist, right? It costs the taxpayer trillions, folks. And then you drive along here, say, speaking of Chicago, and you see one car, Tesla car, like every 3 months or so. And then you wonder, how did that reach trillions, right? You know, in value in stock market? Because Obama and Trump and Biden and before them, whoever it is, they appropriate money on account of Americans, and Federal Reserve and whoever it is print digitize money and then just basically give it to them, right? The work that is done in space, SpaceX, is all the work of NASA. Design, production, launch, training, manning, you name it, it's all NASA. All Tesla does or SpaceX does is take the money in billions, right, and take credit. That's all, basic and simple. Somebody decided to transfer NASA, as is to Elon Musk, right? But he's not my subject here. That's how this country is failing economically. Well, that's one of the ways, right? That is causing the failure of the economy of the US, not just the US, really in the entire world. What is coming toward you? So a point. What is coming toward Western Europe, or Europe, Eastern Europe, and the free Europe, let's put it this way, not under Pustalenin. I don't want to elaborate so much or churn so much information and so on. But I'm going to be specific. What happened in Syria to fix and shore up a despot like that of the Alawites regime? What happened in Chechnya? What happened in Kazakhstan on like basis, of course? What happened in Georgia? What happened in Iran? What happened during the time of that weird dark revolution? What happened in Lebanon? What happened here and there in Egypt, you know, during Nasser and so on? That's what's coming to Western Europe, folks. What's coming to Western Europe is nothing short of apocalypse. And the support right now, the whole world is scrambling to save that operation that basically stumbled in Ukraine. Save it, bring it back up, and then continue the rush again into Western Europe. But what's coming into Western Europe, folks? Nothing short than apocalypse. Your enemies, and they use these Sun Tzu tactics, you know, like they make themselves appear very few to the enemy and hide their purpose and whatever it is. Once they take over is when they show real true nature. Right? Because communism, when it took over in Russia, people believed in it. Nothing different from Nazism, right? People believed that this is going to liberate them from the Tsarist. And even though the local problems were much of the work of the investors in Russia back then, right? Yeah, and oligarchs and so on. You know, the Tsar, as bad as he was, probably Nicholas or his ancestors, I don't think he was solely responsible for the woes of Russian economic situation and people's situation and so on. No. The very same people who convinced people that the source of the problem is Tsar Nicholas are the very same people who caused these calamities and economical and social and so on to happen and unseen behind the scene, right? And so did Nazism. There is extreme parallels between communism and Nazism, basic and simple. And that's that, folks. So now there is a ironclad support for Pustalenin and his communism, and they're going to come back into Europe with apocalypse. They want to make sure this Europe doesn't stand up again. Nothing short of Syria. You know how Syria, they purged the population and murdered millions. The others went out as refugees, and they're trying to lure them back in now in order for them to slay them, right? Or put them in prison of hers and so on. And there are reports of madness, folks. You know, no human being can do that to another human being. That's what's coming your way, folks. What's coming your way in Western Europe is nothing short of Syria, basic and simple. You're going to be Syrianized. Germany and Scandinavia, at least, you're going to be Syrianized. Syrianized. So you're going to become Syrian. That's what's coming, folks. That is what's coming. Scandinavians, it is now or never. Form your own defense. Take your defense into your own hands. Don't lend it or lease it or by proxy to others like NATO, like EU, like United States. No. Nobody is going to defend you. Because if you become part of NATO, they're going to dictate the policy to you. So here's how it happens. I'm going to hypothetically make an assumption here, but guess what? That's very real. Say Russia hypothetically invaded Finland. And then you, Swedes, going to figure out, you're next. Because that was made clear by the Pustalenins and Lizard Eye Cabal of Moscow. Right? So what are you going to do? You're going to rise up to your defense. You're going to immediately go into defense condition, like one perhaps. I don't know if you have that in Sweden. That's like in the US, DEFCON and so on. But then NATO is going to come and say, oh, no, you can't do that. And you start arguing the point that this is your own defense, right? They say, oh, no, you're escalating because we support you. Of course, they're going to say they support you, but you're escalating, and escalation is not good, right? And then they may actually force the point on you. They isolate you, they harass you, they economically hurt you, and they take you out of banking or whatever it is. They have always, they have ways and means. Sinister ways and means. And then suddenly, Russia launches against you, similar to Ukraine. What do you think they're going to do? Similar to what they're doing in Ukraine. They're going to come and take strolls down your streets in Stockholm and here and there, and profess support and give you maybe 100 javelin or something like that. And then, of course, buy time and support Pustalenin financially and intelligence and those moles inside the fifth column. They will help them too, similar to Ukraine, right? Or Finland, or elsewhere. And then eventually they're going to indirectly facilitate the takeover of Pustalenin takeover of Sweden and other Scandinavian countries for that matter. What do you think he's going to do afterwards? You're going to be Syrianized. Syrianized. You're going to be Syrianized. So folks, you can't trust and put the fate of your nation and your people in the hands of those dubious entities that are proven to what they are now, and that's called NATO and EU and Central Bank of EU and Macron and so on and so forth, right? Or the United States for that matter. You can't do that, folks, because if you do, you're going to end up in the gutter. That's history. You're going to be gone down history as the nation that existed for thousands of years as Vikings, and they basically disappeared because they didn't know what to do. Now, they're not going to say, they're not going to divulge or disclose the details of what happened. Oh, that's going to be erased and hidden. Similar to Nazism, now it's on the shoulder of Germans, but nobody speaks of the details. Or communism, notice how communism ugly is, how ugly communism is, and now everybody talks of Nazism, not communism, right? Communism, Nazism, same way and means, same methods, the same, they really mirror Nazism and communism, although they spring from the same root. Their circumstances and events and rise to power and purges and so on, they're pretty much mirror of each other. Castro's, Ayatollah's, Chinese revolution that murdered no less than 100 million early in the last century and so on. Folks, that's pretty much the disease. That's the root of evil. That's the vein, like that black, dark vein, it's just weird, folks. So Scandinavian countries, it's time to take matters into your own hands. and form common defense and ramp up your industry and make sure your enemy understand that they're not going to walk in the park in your countries. Although I doubt it, like there's a colossal if Russia has already received its mortal wound, let's put it this way. But no matter how slim the chance of them arriving in your country is, and that's like now extremely like atomic, on atomic level, right? Small, very small. But you always calculate for the worst. Hope for the best, but calculate for the worst, and then prepare. Be prepared to defend your own country. Be prepared to defend your own population. Be prepared to defend your own children and your own future, of course. And you learned your lesson, standing up against with regime in Syria and Iran and here and there, right? Which murdered millions and millions and sent refugees into your country, right? Right now they come to fight against you in Ukraine. You better believe it. Now that's why the war in Yemen suddenly stopped, or really suddenly, and then now you're gonna see Houthis, you're gonna see Hezbollah is already sending fighters on behalf of Russia, right? But you're gonna see militias and from Iran and from Afghanistan and possibly Pakistan, all these Shiites, Uzbekistan and so on, all these Shiites, of the Middle East and so on, are going to send conscript and dogs, if you will, to fight with Russia against you. Guess what? I hope I spoke into your mind and woke you up. That's my hope. These are trying times, folks. Like I told you, when the Mongols arrived in Baghdad, and there was no resistance, really, there was no army, right? People didn't think that apocalypse is they're gonna wake up on an apocalypse, right? And sure enough, it was an apocalypse. They didn't think that the day before. The day after, there was horror. The Tigris River turned blue for 1 week, and bodies in the streets were strewn in the streets. They turned white because there's nobody. There's so many, like millions, right? Numbers have it 1.8 million. This is similar to coming into, say, a country with 300 million and murdering something similar to like 100 million in 1 week time. They started killing children and women and hacking and right and left and so on. But people a day before, they didn't think that's going to happen. And it happened. They woke up to it. And that's what's going on. That's what's coming toward you, Western Europe. You're going to wake up when they're in your country. You're going to wake up and see. And that's being manifested and demonstrated. Not that they wanted to divulge it or behave this way before they took all over Europe. But they were forced to do it, right, in Ukraine. It shows you their intentions and their nature. They're coming there to really blood purge Europe. Have a nice day, my friends. And I really hope things work out for you. And I don't wish to see this Western Europe go into ashes and blood and guts and massacres and so on. World War II was horror. I don't wish to see that on you again. I don't believe your society is perfect. Oh, it has many problems. It has drugs, it has violence, it has families lost and so on. But still, whatever is left is far better than what the sinister cabal of Pustalenins, of Lizard Eye cabal in Moscow is planning on bringing toward your country. And Winston Churchill coined the word iron, or the sentence or the expression iron curtains. This is going to be iron curtains in your country, but it's going to be more than that. This time they're going to make sure you never guys again and have any freedom again, period. You better believe this, folks. Have a nice day, my friends, and see you later.